Republican Congressman Cory Mills, who's a member of both the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, I want to ask you about Iran and the damage assessment that we've seen thus far, some of the controversy brewing from at least one report in a minute. But I do want to pick up from where Manu left off, because we know House Speaker Johnson had set this July 4th deadline several months ago, and here we are just days away. Major sticking points remain. How confident are you that this can get to the president's desk for him to sign by July 4th?
Well, look, the president's bill actually would allow us to be able to have one of the largest tax cuts for both middle class and working class people. It would allow us to ensure that the Tax Cut Jobs Act doesn't sunset, which would take our corporations and small businesses from what is currently a 21% tax bracket to a 43.4% tax bracket. For many of us who are business owners in the private sector, that's crippling when you think about doubling your tax liabilities. Not to mention the fact that it stops taxpayer funding for Medicare and medical treatments when it comes to illegals who are across the border. It helps to fund border security. It helps to continue to ensure that we can stop the fentanyl, human, child, and sex trafficking that has continued to plague America. So when you look at the overarching goal of what this does, it allows us to get to a runway that builds the economy, because we can't cut our way to prosperity. Any Republican or Democrat who continues to tell you that enough cuts will get our GDP to national debt ratio in line are lying to the American people. Every job owner knows that you have to grow your business by getting more revenue and more income into the business, and that's exactly what we have to do as a country. So when you talk about energy dominance, which is a big part of what president's talked about, when you talk about not getting to never-ending wars, which is a big part of what the president's talking about, when you talk about making sure that we're going to American businesses, American innovation, and American workers, what the president's been talking about is exactly how we grow our way out of our current deficit. And we can't do that if we continue to hinder ourselves with the lie of thinking we can cut our way into that capability.
Okay, so aside from cuts to Medicaid that we heard from Susan Collins there and Tom Tillis, the Senate parliamentarian has ruled out several provisions of the bill currently, including cuts to regulatory agencies and food assistance. Do you support the revised version of this bill right now? And if not, what changes would you advocate for?
Well, I can tell you right now that if you know anything about Congress or the Senate, you don't start making statements on a bill which has not gone through parliamentary provisions and hasn't been voted on, because you get a little bit ahead of your skis and end up embarrassing yourself when you talk about a bill that hasn't even passed the Senate yet. So I'm going to wait until I see the final product to see what comes back to the House. We can then look at how that actually matches with what we're trying to do in President Trump's agenda, and then I can basically take my opinion with a more educated assessment at that point.
So if the bill is delayed, though, past this July 4th set deadline, what are the consequences?
Well, again, I think the Senate needs to do their job and make sure that this gets across and gets back to the House. We've done our job by pushing it across to them, and it's continually been where we're sitting there on a hurry up and wait scenario. The American people don't have time to hurry up and wait. We've been dealing with Biden inflation for over 4+ years now, with higher gas prices, looking at the idea of hitting the American workers, tens of millions of people who illegally come across our border. Those are our real priorities right now, not sitting here trying to have a back and forth of what is a perfect looking bill. We have to understand you cannot let good be the enemy of perfect. So we have to start looking at the fact that this needs to come out of the Senate as soon as possible. They need to do their job, get it to the House, and let's start delivering for the American people.
So aside from divisions within the party itself in terms of this bill and what to cut and what to keep, there's also, as you know, divisions on foreign policy and the president's decision ultimately to use those B-2 bombs, the bunker-busting B-2 bomber, to deliver the bunker-busting bombs there over 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities over the weekend. And the fallout is growing from at least one of these reports, the DIA report, and we should note it's one that was made with low confidence, and we have 17 other intelligence agencies that have yet to make their assessments. But have you had a chance to go over this DIA report, and does anything concern you in terms of what you've seen?
Well, look, there's a lot of people, both on the right and the left, who are trying to claim this is unconstitutional. Let me just first start with that. Article 2, Section 2 of the limited executive war power authorities of the president is very straight and very clear. Not to mention the fact that Congress, before I came in, did something which I think should be repealed, but they did vote on giving the president these types of authorities and powers when they started creating these things called the authorized use of military force. That was created in 1957, 1991, 01, and 02, which essentially abdicates Article 1, Section 8 authorities of Congress over to the executive branch. So I'm sick of people in Congress trying to talk about how this is unconstitutional when it was Congress themselves who abdicated abdicated their roles and responsibility to the executive branch. When it comes to the strike itself, we should, as the president has said, be really honoring the heroes and heroines who had actually taken part in a 36-hour mission that led to complete accuracy, has crippled a $2 trillion investment by a malign Iranian regime, the largest state sponsor of terrorism, where the IAEA has even raised red flags and started sounding the alarm at their enrichment capabilities. When we were able to hit Guam, we were able to hit Natanz, we were able to Esfahan and get Americans back safely, and now create a ceasefire that's now getting a negotiation. This is exactly the peace through strength mechanism President Trump has talked about, and I'm actually very much in support of it.
Well, and no one should question the valor and heroism of our
Amen.
Service members, men and women. So let's just
As an Army
agree
combat
on that.
veteran, you're exactly right, and we should never question our heroes. It's the suits, not the boots, who make these decisions. They're the ones who are out there delivering and protecting us from a national security perspective. We always should honor our armed services, our veterans, and those who gave the ultimate sacrifice.
No doubt. I think we're in full agreement here. In terms of what we're seeing as, again, preliminary reports, this was just one. We're also seeing Israeli intelligence and also the Israel Atomic Energy Commission saying that the critical infrastructure at Fordo was destroyed. And according to Israeli defense officials, their assessment is that there was long-term damage to Iran's nuclear program, setting it back a number of years. What do you make of that discrepancy? Do you anticipate that additional U.S. intelligence will, in fact, confirm some of this reporting from Israel, or do you think we're only going to see more of a divide?
Well, I think that once you start looking at what our Five Eye partners are allowed to do, our satellite imagery, as well as for trying to get some type of a ground force assessment, you'll have a better understanding. But I will tell you that even when Israel came in and actually destroyed the transportation routes that would get them into Guam, where they had a lot of their enriched uranium, or whether it looks at the impacts that was made on the Natanz centrifuges, things like that, I think that everyone can arguably say that there was enough damage to set Iran back. If it didn't set them back, they wouldn't be sitting at the negotiation table and signing a ceasefire.
Do you think in hindsight the president should have used the word obliterated? Because that is what's getting a lot of attention here now. You were someone who served in the military, even going through some of the most supportive in terms of successful intelligence from Israel here now, even the IAEA saying that there was significant damage done. The word obliterated isn't in any of this intelligence in any of these reports. What do you make of that alone?
Well, I love how everyone's trying to pick at whether it was significant damage, obliterated, destroyed, or damaged.
No, I'm not trying to pick. I'm just,
Look,
it's
at
being,
the end of the day, if
wondering.
President Trump walked on water, the headline for CNN that he can't swim. So, at the end of the day, we have to understand that people are going to continue to try and hit him time and time again. And if he uses the word obliterated, destroyed, significant damage, just because it doesn't match certain intelligent analysts with the words that they use or the vernaculars they use, doesn't impact the fact that they actually signed a ceasefire and are willing to come to the negotiation table. And if it wasn't damaged, assessed, if it wasn't obliterated, if it wasn't destroyed, if it wasn't significant damage, as anyone can say, see or report, then they wouldn't be willing to actually come to the table for negotiation, would they?
Do you support the president, if need be, as he has continued to say, that Iran will not obtain a nuclear weapon, period? Do you support the
Absolutely,
need
I support
for
that.
more? For more
Iran
military?
should never have.
No,
Look, it might not take military intervention any further.
No,
but
that was my question. Not whether you support the idea and the argument that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon, but the use of military force, if need be, or more bombs being dropped on these facilities in the future, if it appears that it may be warranted.
Well, whatever it takes to make sure that we aren't engaging in boots on the ground, trillions of dollars in spending, thousands of lives being lost in this idea of this neocon, neoconservative mindset that we can change democracy and nation building. What we're trying to do is to stop an existential threat to our allies and to America. We had open borders under the previous administration. We don't know what kind of sleeper cells are here or what kind of dirty bombs could have gotten through. But you also have to acknowledge the fact Iran wouldn't be where it's at if the previous administration had not unfrozen $10 billion in fungible assets and allowed them to continue to export oil sanctions to China and others, which has actually funded these Shia-backed proxy militias. So when you really look at it, the delisting of the Houthis, which disrupted 12% of global trade and all the others, this is President Trump having to clean up the Democrats' job once again the same way he did when he came in 2016.
All right, Republican Congressman Cory Mills, we got through a lot. Appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.